A single act of kindness can ignite a brutal war. He was a ghost, haunting the criminal underworld, a man hollowed out by tragedy and hardened by relentless betrayal. She was simply a trauma nurse working the midnight shift trying to keep her family afloat. When his shattered life collided with her quiet existence, she did the impossible. She gave him a reason to feel again, and for that fragile beating heart, he will tear the entire city apart to keep her safe. The wind howling off Lake Michigan carried the bitter chill of late November, rattling the reinforced glass windows of Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Inside, the harsh fluorescent lights of the trauma ward cast long, sterile shadows. Clara Hayes rubbed her temples, trying to stave off a mounting headache. At 26, Clara was entirely consumed by the grueling rhythm of the night shift. Her life was a simple, exhausting loop 12-hour shifts, paying off her nursing school loans, and making sure her younger brother Tommy stayed out of trouble. She had no time for romance, no time for drama, and certainly no time for the criminal underworld that secretly ran the streets of Chicago. It was 2:14 a.m. when the heavy double doors of the private emergency bay swung open. The standard protocol of the ER shattered in an instant. There were no sirens, no paramedics calling out vitals, just the heavy authoritative thud of expensive leather shoes against the linoleum floor. 3 men walked in. 2 of them were built like freight trains, their dark tailored suits bulging over hidden holsters. But it was the man in the center who commanded the oxygen in the room. Dominic Russo. Even someone as disconnected from the city's gossip as Clara recognized the aura of immense, terrifying power. Dominic was the undisputed head of the Russo syndicate, a man whose name was whispered in boardroom negotiations and back-alley dealings alike. He was strikingly handsome, with sharp aristocratic features and dark, tempestuous eyes, but his presence was chilling. 5 years ago, a rival faction had ambushed his car. Dominic had survived. His young wife, Isabella, had not. Since that day, the whispers said Dominic Russo had lost his humanity. He ruled with a cold, mechanical ruthlessness, a king sitting on a throne of ash. Tonight, the king was bleeding. A deep, jagged laceration tore through the side of his charcoal suit jacket, soaking the fine wool. He wasn't leaning on his men for support. He stood entirely under his own power, his jaw locked in a rigid line of defiance against the pain. "Clear the room!" The taller of the 2 guards barked at the attending physician. The doctor, visibly trembling, looked like he was about to argue, but Dominic raised a single gloved hand. "I don't have time for a crowd!" Dominic's voice was a low, gravelly baritone that sent a shiver down Clara's spine. "Fix it. Quietly." The attending doctor hesitated, intimidated by the sheer menace of the men. Clara, however, let her training override her fear. She stepped forward, snapping a fresh pair of latex gloves onto her hands. "If you want it fixed, you need to sit down and let me work Mr. Russo. Your men can wait by the door. They're blocking my light." The room went dead silent. The tall guard, a man named Dante, stepped forward, his hand slipping inside his jacket, but Dominic stopped him with a sharp look. Slowly, Dominic turned his dark, penetrating gaze to Clara. For a long second, he studied her. He took in her exhausted eyes, her messy auburn hair tied in a hasty bun, and the unwavering steadiness of her stance. To Clara's surprise, the corner of Dominic's mouth twitched in a faint, humorless smirk. He shrugged off his ruined jacket with a wince and sat on the edge of the examination table. "Do it then," he murmured. As Clara approached, she saw the true extent of the damage. It was a knife wound dangerously close to his ribs. "I need to clean this and stitch it. I'll administer a local anesthetic," she said, her voice strictly professional as she prepped the tray. "No anesthetics," Dominic commanded softly. "I need a clear head." Clara paused, looking up into his eyes. "It's a deep laceration. The suturing will be excruciating." "I felt worse," he replied, and in those 3 words Clara heard an ocean of unresolved grief. The hollow emptiness in his gaze was something she recognized. It was the look of a survivor who wished they hadn't survived. "Suit yourself," she said gently. For the next 20 minutes, Clara worked with meticulous precision. She cleaned the torn flesh, threaded the needle, and began to stitch. Throughout the agonizing process, Dominic did not make a single sound. His muscles twitched involuntarily, but his breathing remained steady. Clara found herself acutely aware of the warmth radiating from him, the faint scent of expensive cologne mixed with the metallic tang of injury. To distract him, she spoke in a soft, rhythmic cadence. "You should know standard protocol requires us to report sharp force trauma to the police." "And will you nurse?" he asked, his eyes locked onto her face. "I'm a nurse, not a detective," Clara replied smoothly, tying off a knot. "My job is to heal the damage. How you got it is your business. Just try not to rip these out before they heal. You have 32 stitches here. Keep it dry." When she finally finished and stepped back, Dominic stood up. He didn't look at his wound. He looked only at her. For the first time in 5 years, the ice around Dominic Russo's heart felt a strange, inexplicable fracture. He was accustomed to people looking at him with terror-greed or obsequious flattery. Clara Hayes had looked at him with something entirely different, genuine, unadulterated empathy. "What is your name?" he asked quietly. "Clara." Dominic nodded slowly. "Thank you, Clara. Dante will compensate the hospital for the discretion." Without another word, he and his men vanished into the night, leaving Clara standing in the quiet hum of the trauma bay, feeling as though she had just survived a brush with a hurricane. She assumed she would never see him again. She was entirely wrong. For the next 2 weeks, the city of Chicago was a powder keg. Lorenzo Moretti, an ambitious and utterly ruthless underboss from the South Side, had been aggressively pushing into Russo territory. The knife wound Dominic had sustained was the result of a botched negotiation, a brazen assassination attempt by one of Moretti's lieutenants. Dominic retaliated with swift, devastating precision, dismantling 3 of Moretti's operations in a matter of days. Yet amid the chaos, the meetings, and the constant threat of open warfare, Dominic's mind kept drifting back to the blinding fluorescent lights of the hospital room and the soft, steady hands of Clara Hayes. He found himself sitting in the cavernous study of his Lake Forest estate, staring into the fireplace. His home was a fortress heavily guarded and painfully empty. Everywhere he looked, he saw the ghost of his past. But lately, when he closed his eyes, he didn't see the tragedy of 5 years ago. He saw auburn hair and defiant, compassionate eyes. "You're distracted, boss," Dante remarked one evening, pouring 2 glasses of scotch. Dante had been Dominic's right hand since they were teenagers, closer than a brother. "You've had me run a background check on a civilian nurse. Why?" Dominic took the glass, swirling the amber liquid. "She patched me up." "A lot of doctors have patched you up," Dante pointed out, leaning against the mahogany desk. "You didn't put a surveillance detail on them." "Shh, she's different," Dominic murmured, the admission feeling foreign on his tongue. "There's a purity to her, something the world hasn't corrupted yet. I just want to ensure she's safe." "What did you find?" Dante sighed, pulling a manila folder from his jacket. "Clara Hayes, 26. Parents died in a car crash when she was 19. She raised her younger brother, Tommy. She works herself to the bone paying off debts. But there's a complication, Dominic." Dominic's eyes narrowed, the temperature in the room seeming to drop. "What kind of complication?" "The brother Tommy. He's 21, a college dropout, and he likes to play poker. He's been spending time at the Velvet Room, that underground casino in the West Loop." "That's Moretti's joint," Dominic said, his grip tightening on his glass. "Exactly." Dante nodded gravely. "And Tommy isn't just playing, he's losing, badly. Word on the street is he owes Moretti's men $50,000. They've given him a week to pay or they start breaking bones. And Dominic, Lorenzo Moretti knows you were at Northwestern that night. He has eyes everywhere. If he finds out the nurse who treated you is tied to a debt he owns, he will use her to get to you." A deadly silence fell over the study. The glass in Dominic's hand shattered, the scotch spilling over his knuckles. The mere thought of Lorenzo's grimy hands anywhere near Clara ignited a furious, blinding rage within him, a protective instinct he hadn't felt since Isabella. "Clear the boy's debt!" Dominic ordered, his voice vibrating with lethal intent. "Do it through a shell. Don't let Moretti know it comes from me. And double the detail on Clara. If anyone from the Moretti crew even breathes in her direction, I want them buried." Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Clara was oblivious to the invisible shield surrounding her. She came home to her modest apartment in Lincoln Park, dropping her keys on the counter with a heavy sigh. The apartment was dark, but she immediately noticed something was wrong. Drawers were pulled out, books were scattered across the floor. "Tommy," she called out, panic rising in her chest. Her brother emerged from the kitchen looking pale and terrified. He had a nasty bruise forming along his jawline. "Tommy, what happened? Who did this to you?" Clara rushed forward, examining his face. "I messed up, Clara." Tommy choked out, tears pooling in his eyes. "I messed up really bad. I owe money to some dangerous people, 50 grand. They came here today looking for it. They tore the place apart." Clara felt the floor drop out from under her. $50,000, Tommy, and we barely have enough for rent." "I thought I could win it back," he sobbed. "They said if I don't have the money by Friday, they're going to kill me, and they said they know where you work." Clara hugged him tightly, her mind racing. She had faced tragedy before. She had rebuilt their lives from nothing after their parents died. But this was different. This wasn't a late bill or a difficult exam. These were real monsters. "We'll go to the police," Clara said, though her voice trembled. "You can't—" Tommy panicked, pulling away. "The police can't stop these guys. They own the cops in that precinct. Clara, they'll kill us both." For the next 48 hours, Clara lived in a state of sheer terror. She tried to apply for loans she called distant relatives. She even considered selling her car, but nothing could scrounge up $50,000 in 2 days. She felt the heavy, suffocating weight of the city closing in on her. She noticed a black SUV parked across the street from her apartment building, its tinted windows offering no clues. She assumed it was her brother's creditors watching her, waiting for the deadline. She didn't know the men in the SUV were Dominic Russo's elite guards, armed to the teeth and instructed to kill anyone who tried to harm her. Thursday evening. The deadline was less than 24 hours away. Clara was walking home from the L train station, the freezing rain soaking through her thin wool coat. She felt utterly defeated. She had failed to protect her brother. As she turned the corner onto her street, a shadow detached itself from the alleyway. "Miss Hayes," Clara gasped, dropping her purse. A man stood blocking her path. It wasn't one of the men who had come to the hospital. He was slick, wearing a cheap leather jacket, a cruel smile twisting his lips. He belonged to Lorenzo Moretti. "Your brother's time is almost up," the man sneered, stepping closer, invading her personal space. "Mr. Moretti is losing his patience, but looking at you, maybe we can work out an alternative payment plan." He reached out to touch her wet cheek. Clara recoiled, her heart hammering against her ribs. She braced herself to run, but before she could take a single step, the deafening roar of a luxury engine tore through the street. A sleek black Bentley swerved onto the curb, cutting off the alleyway. The doors flew open. Dante was out first, his gun drawn, and pointed directly at the thug's head, but it was the man who stepped out of the back seat that made Clara's breath hitch. Dominic Russo. He didn't look like a wounded patient tonight. He looked like the devil himself, wrapped in a black cashmere overcoat, his eyes burning with an intense, homicidal fury. Dominic walked slowly toward the thug, the rain instantly matting his dark hair. The thug, recognizing the boss of the Russo family, turned ghostly white and raised his hand, stammering. "Mr. Russo, I didn't know she's just a—" Dominic didn't give him a chance to finish. With terrifying speed and fluid grace, Dominic grabbed the man by the throat and slammed him violently against the brick wall. The sickening crack of bone echoed in the wet alley. "If you or any of Lorenzo's rats ever come within a mile of this woman again," Dominic whispered, his voice dangerously soft, I will peel the skin from your body while you watch. Tell Lorenzo his debt is paid. Now run." Dominic dropped the man who scrambled away into the darkness, gasping for air. Dominic turned to Clara. She was shivering, staring at him with wide, shocked eyes. He took off his overcoat and stepped forward, draping the heavy, warm cashmere over her trembling shoulders. The scent of his cedar and smoke cologne enveloped her. "You're safe," he said softly, the lethal monster of a moment ago vanishing, replaced by a man looking at her with profound gentleness. "You," Clara stammered, clutching the coat around her, "you paid my brother's debt." "Why, how did you even know? I make it my business to know everything that happens in my city," Dominic replied, his gaze intense, "especially when it concerns the woman who saved my life." "I just did my job," Clara whispered, feeling the overwhelming gravity of his presence. "I can't pay you back $50,000, Mr. Russo. I don't have it." "I don't want your money, Clara," he said, stepping closer. The rain fell heavily around them, but under the canopy of the alley, they were completely locked into each other's orbit. "But you need to understand the reality of what just happened. Lorenzo Moretti is a desperate, vicious man. I humiliated his enforcer tonight. He knows I'm protecting you now. That makes you a target." "What are you saying?" Clara asked, dread pooling in her stomach. "I'm saying you and your brother cannot stay in this apartment. It isn't safe. You are coming with me to my estate." Clara shook her head, taking a step back. No, I can't do that. I don't belong in your world. I'm just a nurse. I won't be a prisoner to a mafia boss." Dominic's eyes flashed with a complicated mix of pain and admiration. He admired her defiance. Most people would have fallen to their knees in gratitude, but Clara was fiercely independent. "You won't be a prisoner," Dominic swore, his voice rough with emotion. "You will be my honored guest. You will have full freedom on the grounds you can continue to work, and Dante will personally drive you. But I cannot. I will not allow Lorenzo to use you to break me. I lost someone I was supposed to protect once, Clara. I won't let it happen again." The raw vulnerability in his last sentence cracked Clara's resolve. Beneath the terrifying exterior of the crime lord, she saw the broken man she had stitched back together in the hospital. He wasn't just offering protection, he was desperate for redemption. Clara looked at the dark street, then up into Dominic's pleading, intense eyes. She knew her life was irrevocably changed. The quiet, ordinary existence she had fought so hard to maintain was gone, replaced by a dangerous, thrilling unknown. "Okay," she whispered softly. "I'll go with you." Dominic's chest heaved a subtle sigh of relief. He placed a gentle hand on the small of her back, guiding her toward the idling Bentley. As the heavy doors closed, shielding her from the cold Chicago rain, Clara realized she was stepping into the heart of the darkness. But as she looked at Dominic sitting beside her, watching her with a fierce, unwavering protectiveness, she wondered if maybe she could be the light that brought him back to life. The Russo estate in Lake Forest was not merely a home. It was a modern fortress masquerading as a Gilded Age masterpiece. Set back on 20 acres of manicured, heavily wooded land overlooking the gray expanse of Lake Michigan, the property was surrounded by 12-foot wrought iron gates interlaced with state-of-the-art security sensors. As the Bentley glided up the sweeping gravel driveway, Clara Hayes looked out the tinted windows, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was trading one nightmare for a completely different kind of danger. Tommy sat in the back of the trailing SUV, guarded by two men who looked like they chewed gravel for breakfast. Finally brought into the grand foyer, his eyes were wide, darting from the marble floors to the vaulted ceilings adorned with intricate frescoes. "I've had the West Wing prepared for you and your brother," Dominic said, shrugging off his wet cashmere overcoat and handing it to a silent, uniformed housekeeper. "There are fresh clothes in the closets. Martha will bring you whatever you need. You are free to roam the grounds, the library, the indoor pool. But you do not approach the front gates without a detail." Clara crossed her arms, trying to suppress a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold rain she had just escaped. I appreciate the hospitality, Mr. Russo, truly. But I have a shift at the hospital tomorrow evening. I can't just abandon my job. Dante, standing near the grand staircase, scoffed quietly. Miss Hayes, with all due respect, there's an active hit out on your brother, and you've been marked by association. You aren't going anywhere near downtown Chicago. I am going to work, Clara said, her voice trembling, but her chin tilting upward in defiance. I am a charge nurse. People rely on me. If I don't show up, they will fire me. And since I am currently relying on the charity of a crime syndicate to stay alive, keeping my employment is my only shred of independence. I won't give it up. The foyer went completely still. Dante tensed, unaccustomed to anyone speaking back to his boss. But Dominic simply stared at Clara, his dark eyes unreadable. Slowly, the faint phantom ghost of a smile touched the corners of his mouth. He admired her fire. In a world full of yes-men and terrified subordinates, Clara's stubborn resilience was a rare, intoxicating drug. DT. Dante. Dominic murmured, his gaze never leaving Clara's. Assign a 4-man detail to Miss Hayes. 2 inside the hospital, 2 covering the perimeter. She goes to work, but she travels in the armored Cadillac. If anyone from the Moretti crew gets within a block of Northwestern Memorial, you authorize lethal force. Dante nodded, though he looked deeply displeased. Understood, boss. As the days turned into a week, an uneasy routine settled over the estate. Tommy, still terrified of his own shadow, spent most of his time in the media room, isolating himself out of guilt. Clara, however, found herself inevitably drawn into Dominic's orbit. Late one night, returning from a grueling double shift, she found Dominic in his sprawling mahogany-paneled study. The door was ajar. He was sitting at his desk, bathed in the amber glow of a single desk lamp, reviewing a ledger. He looked exhausted, the shadows under his eyes mirroring her own. The harsh reality of his world was evident on his desk: scattered blueprints of the Southside burner phones, and a classified dossier bearing the name of a real, highly publicized Chicago political figure, Alderman Gregory Mitchell. It was an open secret that the alderman was in the pocket of the outfit, a remnant of the old Chicago syndicate tracing its roots back to Paul Ricca and Sam Giancana. Now, Dominic Russo held those reins, navigating the treacherous waters of corrupt politics and brutal street wars. Clara knocked lightly on the doorframe. Dominic looked up, his hand instinctively dropping below the desk, where she knew he kept a weapon, before he relaxed, recognizing her. "You're working late," she noted, stepping softly into the room. "Wars are expensive, Clara, and they require an exhausting amount of paperwork," he replied, closing the dossier. He gestured to a leather armchair opposite him. "Sit. Have a drink with me." She hesitated, then sat down, accepting a crystal glass of sparkling water he poured for her. "Why are you doing this, Dominic?" she asked, using his first name for the first time. The intimacy of it seemed to hang in the quiet air. "You paid $50,000 to save my brother. You've turned your home into a hotel for us. You are risking open war with Lorenzo Moretti over a nurse who stitched you up once." Dominic leaned back, looking into the dying embers of the fireplace. For a long moment, the silence was absolute. 5 years ago, Dominic began, his voice rough scraping against the quiet room. "I was married. Isabella was innocent. She didn't understand the depths of this life, and I arrogantly believed my power was enough to shield her from it. We were driving down Lower Wacker Drive. A rival family boxed us in. They opened fire." He paused, his jaw clenching so hard Clara thought his teeth might shatter. "I took 3 bullets. I survived. Isabella took one to the throat. She bled out in my arms before the ambulance could even cross the river." He turned his piercing gaze back to Clara. "When I sat on your examination table bleeding and I looked into your eyes, I saw that same innocence, that same light. I realized that my soul is already damned, Clara. But if I can protect your light from the dark, ugly reality of this city, then maybe there is one redeeming act left in my miserable life." Clara felt a profound ache in her chest. She reached across the desk, her small warm hand covering his large scarred one. She felt him flinch at the contact, unaccustomed to a touch that wasn't violent, but he didn't pull away. "You aren't damned, Dominic," she whispered fiercely. "You just stopped believing you could be saved." In that dimly lit study, the boundaries between the Mafia kingpin and the trauma nurse began to blur, replaced by a magnetic, undeniable pull that would soon put them both in the crosshairs of a ruthless enemy. The betrayal did not come with a dramatic warning. It arrived cloaked in the mundane routine of a Tuesday night. Clara was halfway through her shift at Northwestern. The ER was relatively quiet, a rare blessing on a freezing December night. Dominic's security detail was perfectly integrated into the background. Two men, Bennett and Rossi, sat in the waiting area, reading magazines, their suits tailored to hide the heavy firepower beneath. Outside, a sleek black SUV idled near the ambulance bay. What Dominic did not know, and what Dante's rigorous background checks had failed to uncover, was that Bennett had a gambling addiction that rivaled Tommy's, and Lorenzo Moretti had bought Bennett's debt 3 months ago. At 2 a.m., Lorenzo decided to cash in his chips. Clara was in the supply room taking inventory of the sterile bandages. The harsh fluorescent light hummed above her. She heard the heavy metal door creak open and close, the lock clicking shut. Assuming it was another nurse, she didn't look up from her clipboard. "Can you grab the extra saline bags on the top shelf? I can't reach them." "I'm afraid I'm not here for saline, Miss Hayes." The voice was slick, oily, and entirely unfamiliar. Clara spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. Standing between her and the only exit was a man she had never seen before, but the aura of violence surrounding him was unmistakable. He was in his late 40s, wearing a tailored pinstripe suit, his hair slicked back with heavy pomade. Lorenzo Moretti. "How did you get in here?" Clara demanded, backing up until her spine hit the cool metal shelving. "There are guards right outside." "Ah, yes, Dominic's loyal dogs," Lorenzo chuckled, a dry, grating sound. "It's amazing what a man will do when you threaten to cut off his fingers over a poker debt. Bennett was quite cooperative. Rossi is currently bleeding out quietly in the men's restroom, which leaves just you and me, sweetheart." Panic, cold and sharp, flooded Clara's veins. She calculated her options. The room was soundproof to keep the noise of the ER out. The panic button was across the room behind Lorenzo. "What do you want?" she asked, trying to keep her voice from shaking, channeling the calm she used with critical patience. "Dominic has cost me a lot of money," Lorenzo said, taking a slow, deliberate step toward her. "He blew up my warehouses. He crippled my enforcers. And rumor has it he's doing all of this over a pretty little nurse. I didn't believe it. Dominic Russo, the Ice King of Chicago, growing a heart, but my sources say he moved you into the Lake Forest estate." Lorenzo pulled a sleek silver suppressed pistol from his jacket. "He took my territory, Clara, so I'm going to take his heart, and I'm going to make him listen while I stop it from beating." Lorenzo pulled out a burner phone with his left hand, dialed a number, and put it on speaker. It rang twice before it was answered. "Bennett, report." Dominic's deep, authoritative voice echoed from the tiny speaker. "Not quite Russo," Lorenzo purred. There was a dead, terrifying silence on the other end of the line. When Dominic finally spoke, his voice was so devoid of emotion it sounded less like a man and more like the Grim Reaper. "Lorenzo, if you touch her, I will erase your entire bloodline from the face of the earth." Big words for a man who is 20 miles away. Lorenzo mocked, stepping closer to Clara, raising the barrel of the gun to point directly at her chest. "Say hello to your savior, Clara." Clara stared down the barrel of the gun. She thought of Tommy. She thought of the tragic, lonely man sitting in his mahogany study. She refused to give Lorenzo the satisfaction of her fear. "Dominic," Clara said, her voice remarkably steady, "don't negotiate with this animal." "Clara." Dominic's voice cracked a horrifying fracture in his impenetrable armor. The sound of a heavy chair smashing against a wall echoed through the phone. "Lorenzo, name your price. The South Side is yours. The ports, the casinos, take them. I don't want your scraps, Dominic, Lorenzo barked, his face twisting with rage. I want your suffering. I want you to feel what it's like to be broken. Lorenzo raised the gun to eye level, his finger tightening on the trigger. Crash. The reinforced glass window of the supply room door shattered into a million glittering diamonds. Before Lorenzo could react, a massive bloody hand reached through the jagged hole, grabbed Lorenzo by the collar of his expensive suit, and violently slammed him face first into the steel door frame. It was Rossi. Dominic's guard wasn't dead yet. Though he was bleeding heavily from a stab wound to the gut, his loyalty to the Russo family overrode his fading life force. Lorenzo dropped the phone and the gun, scrambling backward as Rossi collapsed to the floor. Clara didn't hesitate. She lunged forward, kicking the silver pistol under the heavy shelving cabinets where Lorenzo couldn't reach it. Infuriated, Lorenzo backhanded Clara across the face. The sheer force of the blow sent her crashing into a tray of surgical instruments, metal clattering loudly as she hit the linoleum floor. Her vision blurred, the metallic taste of blood filling her mouth. Lorenzo turned toward the door to flee, but a sudden deafening wail of sirens outside the hospital signaled that Dominic's wrath was already arriving. The trap had failed. The predator was about to become the prey. The underground parking structure of Northwestern Memorial was a labyrinth of concrete pillars and flickering fluorescent lights. Lorenzo Moretti, breathing heavily and bleeding from the gash on his forehead where Rossi had smashed him into the doorframe, sprinted toward his extraction vehicle. He had 3 heavily armed men waiting by a blacked-out van. "Start the car, move," Lorenzo screamed, clutching his ribs. But as the driver turned the ignition, the screech of tires echoed through the concrete cavern. 3 heavily armored Cadillac Escalades tore down the ramp, moving with military precision. They didn't just block Lorenzo's van, they rammed it. The sound of crunching metal and shattering glass was deafening. The lead Cadillac slammed into the side of the van, pinning the driver's door shut. Before the dust could even settle, the doors of the Escalades flew open. A dozen of Dominic's elite enforcers poured out, armed with tactical rifles. The air was instantly filled with the deafening roar of automatic gunfire ripping through the quiet night. Lorenzo's men returned fire, but they were vastly outmatched and outgunned. It wasn't a firefight. It was an execution. Within 30 seconds, the resistance was silenced. Lorenzo, trapped in the back of the crumpled van, kicked the back doors open and scrambled out, desperate to escape. He made it exactly 10 feet before a shadow stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. Dominic Russo. Dominic didn't have a rifle. He held a customized M1911 pistol, but he kept it lowered at his side. He wore no overcoat, just a tailored black shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal a lattice of faded scars on his forearms. His face was a mask of unadulterated, terrifying calm. It was the face of a man who had entirely disconnected from his humanity. "Dominic!" Lorenzo gasped, holding his hands up, stumbling backward. "We can make a deal. I have offshore accounts. I can give you everything." Dominic didn't speak. He walked forward at a measured, deliberate pace. "It was just business," Lorenzo screamed, his voice cracking with sheer terror as he backed into a concrete wall, nowhere left to run. "You know how this game works. She's just collateral." "She is my life," Dominic whispered. The words were quiet, but they echoed with the weight of a death sentence. Dominic raised the heavy pistol. He didn't aim for the head or the heart. He aimed for Lorenzo's right kneecap. Bang! Lorenzo's agonizing shriek ripped through the garage as his leg buckled, sending him crashing to the greasy concrete. Dominic stepped closer, his polished shoes stopping mere inches from Lorenzo's face. "You threatened her?" Dominic said, his voice dropping to a demonic register. He aimed at the left kneecap. Bang! Another scream, raw and bloody. "You put your hands on her," Dominic continued, his eyes devoid of any mercy. He aimed at Lorenzo's right shoulder. Before Dominic could pull the trigger a third time, a frantic voice echoed through the garage. "Dominic, stop." Dominic froze. His finger hovered over the trigger. He turned slowly, his chest heaving. Clara stood at the entrance of the ramp. She was a bruised, battered vision. Her nursing scrubs were torn, and a dark purple bruise was blooming across her left cheekbone where Lorenzo had struck her. She was out of breath, having run all the way down from the ER. Dominic's cold, lifeless expression shattered the moment he saw her face. He saw the bruise. The monster within him roared, demanding he empty the entire magazine into Lorenzo's skull for daring to mark her skin. He turned back to the writhing mob boss, raising the gun to Lorenzo's head. "Dominic, look at me!" Clara yelled, running forward, ignoring Dante and the heavily armed men who tried to hold her back. She broke through their line and stepped right in front of Dominic, standing between the barrel of his gun and Lorenzo's bleeding body. "Move, Clara!" Dominic ground out his hand, shaking with adrenaline and rage. "He has to die. He has to pay." "He's done," Clara shouted, grabbing Dominic's gun arm with both hands, forcing the barrel down toward the concrete. "Look at him, Dominic. He's crippled. Your men are calling the police. Let him rot in a federal prison. If you execute him like an animal right here in cold blood, you cross a line you can never come back from." "I crossed that line years ago." Dominic roared, the pain of 1,000 past sins cracking his voice. "I am a monster, Clara. Look at what I do. Look at the violence I bring to you." Clara didn't flinch. She stepped closer, invading his personal space, surrounded by the smell of gunpowder and blood. She reached up with her trembling, blood-stained hands and framed his face. She forced his dark, tortured eyes to meet hers. "You are not a monster," she said, her voice fierce and unwavering. "You are the man who saved my brother. You are the man who risked everything to protect a stranger. You did this for me. I know who you are, Dominic Russo, and I am not afraid of you." Dominic stared at her, utterly paralyzed. The sheer force of her acceptance broke the dam holding back 5 years of agonizing grief and self-hatred. The pistol slipped from his grip, clattering uselessly against the concrete floor. He didn't care about Lorenzo groaning in a pool of his own blood. He didn't care about the approaching wail of police sirens or the political fallout with the outfit that would inevitably follow this night. With a desperate, ragged breath, Dominic wrapped his massive arms around Clara, pulling her flush against his chest. He buried his face in her auburn hair, holding her so tightly as if letting go would mean fading out of existence. Clara wrapped her arms around his waist, burying her face in his chest, anchoring him to the earth. "I thought I lost you," he choked out, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I would have burned this entire city to ash if he had taken you from me." "I'm right here," she whispered, her own tears soaking into his shirt. "I'm not going anywhere." In the dimly lit, smoke-filled parking garage, surrounded by the carnage of a Mafia war, Dominic tilted her chin up. He looked at her bruised cheek with deep sorrow, and then he leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was bruised, desperate, and possessive, a sealing of an unbreakable vow. Clara met his intensity, pouring every ounce of her gratitude, fear, and rapidly blooming love into him. She knew in that exact moment that her quiet, ordinary life was officially dead. She had bound her soul to the king of the underworld, and she realized with terrifying clarity that she wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. The sirens grew louder, flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the wet concrete walls. Dante stepped forward, gently touching Dominic's shoulder. "Boss, the police, the feds, they're all 60 seconds out. The cleanup crew will handle Lorenzo. We need to vanish. Now." Dominic broke the kiss, his forehead resting against Clara's. His eyes, once hollow and dead, were now burning with a fierce protective fire. "Are you ready?" he asked her quietly. Clara looked at the destruction around them, and then at the man who would tear the heavens apart to keep her safe. She nodded, slipping her hand securely into his. "Let's go home." By morning, the city of Chicago was awake and screaming. The shootout in the Northwestern Memorial parking garage dominated every news channel from the Chicago Tribune to the national broadcasts. The official police report cited a gang-related dispute, but anyone who understood the true pulse of the city knew exactly what had happened. Lorenzo Moretti was currently in the intensive care unit at Cook County Hospital. his shattered knees heavily bandaged, surrounded by a dozen armed U.S. Marshals. He had survived, but his reign of terror was permanently paralyzed. Inside the sprawling Russo estate in Lake Forest, the atmosphere was a suffocating mix of triumph and impending doom. Dominic's violent retaliation had neutralized an immediate threat, but it had also drawn the glaring, unforgiving spotlight of the federal government. Clara stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the master suite, watching the gray, turbulent waters of Lake Michigan crash against the private seawall. She was dressed in one of Dominic's oversized dress shirts, the soft cotton a stark contrast to the dark purple bruise blooming across her cheekbone. The pain in her face was a dull throb, a physical reminder of the permanent line she had crossed. She wasn't just a nurse anymore. She was the woman who had stood in front of a loaded gun for the most feared man in the Midwest. The heavy oak door creaked open, and Dominic stepped into the room. He looked battered, dark circles carving hollows under his eyes. He had spent the entire night on encrypted phone calls, navigating the catastrophic political fallout of the garage shootout. The outfit. The shadow council of older established mafia bosses who governed the Midwest was furious. Open warfare in a downtown hospital garage was bad for business. Dominic walked up behind Clara, wrapping his arms securely around her waist and resting his chin gently on her shoulder, careful not to touch her bruised cheek. The FBI's Organized Crime Task Force has taken over Lorenzo's case. Dominic murmured, his voice a low, exhausted rumble against her neck. Special Agent Thomas Kessler. He's a zealot. He works out of the Chicago field office on Roosevelt Road, and he's been trying to build a RICO case against me for 3 years. Last night just gave him the ammunition he needs. Clara leaned back into his solid warmth, her hands resting over his. What does that mean for us? It means the violence is over, but the war is moving into the courtrooms and the back channels, Dominic replied. And it means I have to face the commission tonight. They want answers. Clara turned around in his arms, her eyes searching his. Will they hurt you? They will try to strip my power. Dominic said, a cold, calculating edge returning to his gaze. Lorenzo was a rabid dog, but he had powerful friends, namely Alderman Gregory Mitchell. Mitchell controls the city zoning board. He was using Lorenzo to muscle construction unions on the new lakefront development project, a project I currently control. With Lorenzo out of the picture, Mitchell's exposed. He will use his political weight to pressure the commission into handing my territory over to him to keep the peace. Then we don't let him, Clara said. The words slipped out of her mouth before she even registered them. Dominic blinked slightly, taken aback by her use of the word we. He looked down at this beautiful, battered woman, marveling at her resilience. Most civilians would have run screaming from the estate by now. Clara was digging her heels into the blood-soaked earth. Clara, he said softly, brushing a stray lock of auburn hair behind her ear. You don't have to fight this war. I promise to protect you. I can arrange for you and Tommy to disappear. Fresh identities, a house in Europe completely funded. You would never have to look over your shoulder again. Clara's eyes hardened. Do you want me to leave? I would rather tear my own heart out of my chest. Dominic confessed, his voice raw with a desperate, terrifying honesty. But I dragged you into hell. It's my job to give you a way out. I made my choice in that parking garage, Dominic, Clara said firmly, gripping his shirt lapels. I stitch people back together. That's what I do. And right now, your empire is bleeding. You're not sending me away. I'm staying, and I am going to help you survive this. A fierce, possessive fire ignited in Dominic's dark eyes. He leaned down, capturing her lips in a kiss that was 1,000 times more tender than the desperate clash in the garage, yet infinitely more binding. It was a silent coronation. Clara Hayes was no longer collateral damage. She was the queen of the Russo syndicate. 2 days later, the reality of Clara's new life crashed down upon her in the form of a black government-issued sedan. She'd insisted on going to the pharmacy to pick up specialized medical supplies for Rossi Dominic's loyal guard, who was quietly recovering in the estate's private medical wing. Dante had accompanied her driving the armored Cadillac. But as they exited the pharmacy in the affluent suburb of Highland Park, two federal agents in sharp suits intercepted them on the sidewalk. "Clara Hayes," the taller agent asked, flashing a gold FBI badge. "Special Agent Kessler, we need you to come with us." Dante instantly stepped between Clara and the agents, his hand hovering over his concealed weapon. "Miss Hayes is represented by legal counsel. She doesn't speak to law enforcement without her attorney present." Crow. "This isn't a friendly chat, Dante," Kessler sneered, handing over a thick folded document. "It's a federal grand jury subpoena, and if she doesn't get in this car right now, I have a warrant for the arrest of her brother Thomas Hayes on charges of illegal gambling wire fraud and conspiracy to commit extortion." Clara's blood ran cold. The $50,000 debt, the underground casino, the feds had tracked it. "Stand down, Dante," Clara commanded. Her voice was surprisingly steady, echoing the same authoritative tone she used during emergency surgeries. She looked at Kessler with icy composure. "I will follow you to your office. Dante will drive me. You can follow behind us. If you try to put me in handcuffs, my lawyer will have this entire subpoena thrown out on grounds of harassment before we even reach the city limits." Kessler's jaw tightened, but he nodded. An hour later, Clara was sitting in a sterile, windowless interrogation room inside the Dirksen Federal Building in downtown Chicago. Special Agent Kessler sat across from her, dropping a thick manila folder onto the metal table. "Let me paint a picture for you, Clara," Kessler began, leaning forward. "Lorenzo Moretti is singing like a bird in his hospital bed. He's claiming Dominic Russo ambushed him. But we have security footage from Northwestern Memorial. We know Lorenzo went into that hospital hunting for you. We know Dominic retaliated to protect you." Clara said nothing, her face a perfect, unreadable mask. "Dominic is a killer," Kessler continued, his voice dropping to a sympathetic register. "I know he looks like a savior right now because he paid off your brother's debt, but he is a parasite, and he's going down. Alderman Gregory Mitchell has officially authorized a citywide crackdown on the Russo syndicate. We are seizing his assets, freezing his accounts, and raiding his properties. It's over." Kessler opened the folder, sliding a photograph toward her. It was a surveillance picture of Tommy walking out of Lorenzo's underground casino. "Your brother is looking at 20 years in a federal penitentiary," Kessler said quietly. "Unless you help us." "Help you do what?" Clara asked, her voice dangerously calm. "Wear a wire," Kessler demanded. "Get Dominic on tape confessing to the shooting in the garage or confessing to his racketeering operations. You are the only person he trusts. You do this, and your brother gets full immunity. You both go into witness protection. You get your life back." Clara looked at the photograph of her brother, then up at the federal agent. She saw the desperation in Kessler's eyes. He didn't have a solid case. Lorenzo's testimony as a rival mobster was useless in court, and Alderman Mitchell was pushing the FBI to eliminate Dominic to cover his own corrupt tracks. "I want immunity for Tommy in writing," Clara said softly, feigning defeat. "Signed by the U.S. attorney? Then I'll do it." Kessler smiled, thinking he had broken her. Smart girl. 2 hours later, Clara walked back into the Russo estate. Dominic was waiting for her in the grand foyer, pacing like a caged panther. The moment he saw her, he crossed the marble floor and pulled her into a crushing embrace. "Dante told me," Dominic growled, kissing the top of her head. "My lawyers are filing motions to kill the subpoena. I won't let them touch Tommy." Clara pulled back, looking up into his eyes. She reached into her purse, pulled out the tiny, state-of-the-art recording device the FBI had given her, and placed it directly into Dominic's hand. Dominic stared at the wire, then back at Clara, utter shock registering on his features. "They want me to record you confessing," Clara said, her voice steady and resolute. "They threatened Tommy with 20 years. Agent Kessler is working directly with Alderman Mitchell. Mitchell is using the FBI to take you down so he can steal the lakefront project. Dominic crushed the tiny microphone in his massive fist, the plastic snapping sharply. The realization that Clara had been cornered by the feds, threatened with her family's freedom, and still chose to walk straight into his arms and hand over the weapon meant to destroy him. It solidified a love so profound it terrified him. You played them. Dominic realized a wicked, brilliant smile spreading across his face. I bought us time, Clara corrected, walking toward his study, assuming her role as his strategist. Kessler thinks I'm going to get a confession by Friday. We have 3 days to completely destroy Alderman Gregory Mitchell and cut the head off this snake. Dominic followed her, his heart swelling with a dark, euphoric pride. He had spent his life surrounded by men who would sell him out for a fraction of what Clara had been offered. Mitchell is hosting a high society charity gala at the Drake Hotel on Thursday night, Dominic said, spreading a map of downtown Chicago across his mahogany desk. It's a massive fundraiser. The mayor will be there, the chief of police, everyone. Mitchell will be untouchable. No one is untouchable, Clara countered, leaning over the desk, her auburn hair falling over her shoulders. She pointed to the blueprint of the hotel. He's untouchable to a mafia boss. He's not untouchable to a civilian nurse. He knows who I am. He knows I am the reason his attack dog Lorenzo failed. If I approach him at that gala, his ego won't let him walk away. He'll want to gloat. Absolutely not, Dominic said instantly, his protective instincts flaring. I am not sending you into the room with that snake. Dominic, listen to me, Clara insisted, stepping around the desk and taking his face in her hands. Kessler gave me a wire. I convinced him I need a new one since the first malfunctioned. Your tech guys are going to intercept the frequency. When I get Mitchell talking, I won't be broadcasting to the FBI. I'll be broadcasting directly to the hotel's main audio feed. We are going to make Alderman Mitchell confess his corruption to the entire city of Chicago. Dominic stared at her, entirely awestruck. It was a masterstroke. It was ruthless, elegant, and devastatingly permanent. If this goes wrong, Dominic whispered, pulling her flush against him, Mitchell will have you arrested on the spot. It won't go wrong, Clara promised, rising onto her tiptoes to kiss him, because you'll be right there watching my back. Thursday night descended upon Chicago with a bitter, biting frost. The Drake Hotel, a historic beacon of luxury on the magnificent Mile, was ablaze with golden light. Limousines lined up around the block, dropping off the city's political elite, oblivious to the fact that the Russo syndicate had quietly infiltrated the building. Clara Hayes stepped out of a black Cadillac, taking the breath away of every photographer on the red carpet. She wore a floor-length emerald green silk gown that hugged her curves flawlessly, the deep color complementing her auburn hair, which was swept up into an elegant twist. A diamond necklace, a gift from Dominic, rested against her collarbone. Taped securely between her breasts, hidden beneath the silk, was the FBI-issued wire. Dominic did not walk the carpet with her. He entered through the service elevators flanked by Dante and a heavily armed security team taking control of the hotel's central security hub on the 4th floor. Clara walked into the grand ballroom alone. The room was a sea of tuxedos and champagne flutes humming with the polite chatter of the corrupt and the powerful. She grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, her eyes scanning the room. It didn't take long to find him. Alderman Gregory Mitchell was holding court near the ice sculpture, a silver-haired, dangerously charismatic man with a smile that never quite reached his cold eyes. Clara took a deep breath, channeling every ounce of nerve she had built over years of chaotic ER shifts. She walked directly toward him. Mitchell noticed her approach. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second, recognizing the woman who had derailed his entire criminal enterprise. He excused himself from the mayor and stepped toward Clara, his eyes sweeping over her with a mix of disdain and predatory curiosity. "Miss Hayes." Mitchell greeted his voice a smooth, oily purr. "I must admit I am surprised to see you here. I heard you were currently living under house arrest in Lake Forest. How is Mr. Russo's bleeding heart?" Beating just fine, Alderman. Clara smiled sharply, taking a sip of her champagne. Though I imagine yours is beating a little faster these days, what with Lorenzo Moretti singing to the feds from his hospital bed. Mitchell's eyes darkened. He stepped closer, invading her personal space, completely taking the bait. Lorenzo's a fool who got sloppy, but don't think for a second that Dominic has won. Dominic is a relic. He operates with bullets. I operate with laws. I own this city, Clara. Every judge, every badge, every zoning permit. I will crush Dominic Russo, and when I do, you and your little brother will be swept away with the trash. Upstairs in the security room, Dominic stood over his tech expert. His eyes locked on the security monitors showing Clara and Mitchell. Is the frequency hijacked? Dominic barked. Yes, boss. The tech replied, his fingers flying across the keyboard. We've rerouted the FBI feed. We have direct control. Back in the ballroom, Clara leaned in slightly, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. You really think you're untouchable? You paid Lorenzo to ambush Dominic on Lower Wacker. You ordered the hit at the hospital. You're not a politician, Gregory. You're a thug in an expensive suit. Mitchell laughed a dry, arrogant sound. Of course I ordered it. The lakefront development is worth $2 billion. You think I'm going to let a greasy Italian mobster control that kind of infrastructure? I bought the FBI. I bought Agent Kessler. I am the law in Chicago. And tomorrow morning I am signing the executive order to seize every asset Dominic Russo owns. Are you sure about that? Clara asked, her voice dropping its feigned fear, replaced by a chilling, victorious calm. Upstairs, Dominic slammed his hand down on the console. Hit it! Suddenly, the soft classical music playing through the ballroom's massive speaker system cut out with a loud screech of static. The chatter of the elite crowd died down in confusion. And then, Alderman Mitchell's voice boomed through the speakers, echoing off the crystal chandeliers. Of course I ordered it. The lakefront development is worth $2 billion. I bought the FBI. I bought Agent Kessler. I am the law in Chicago. The ballroom descended into absolute, paralyzing silence. Every head in the room turned toward Mitchell. The mayor of Chicago, standing mere feet away, dropped his champagne glass. It shattered against the marble floor, the sound ringing out like a gunshot. Mitchell's face drained of all color. He stared at Clara, horror dawning in his eyes as he realized he had just confessed to federal racketeering bribery and attempted murder in front of 300 witnesses, including the chief of police. You, Mitchell stammered, pointing a trembling finger at Clara. You set me up. I told you, Clara whispered softly, stepping back as hotel security and off-duty police officers began to converge on the alderman. I stitch people back together, but I know exactly where to cut to make them bleed. Clara turned her back on the ruined politician and walked out of the ballroom, her head held high. She didn't stop until she reached the private penthouse suite Dominic had secured on the top floor. She pushed the heavy double doors open. Dominic was standing by the massive window overlooking the glittering skyline of Chicago. He turned as she entered. The heavy, suffocating weight that had haunted his eyes for 5 years was entirely gone. He crossed the room in 3 massive strides, sweeping Clara off her feet and spinning her around his deep, resonant laughter, filling the room, a sound Dante and the guards outside the door hadn't heard in half a decade. You did it, Dominic breathed, setting her down but keeping her flush against his chest. Mitchell's in handcuffs. Agent Kessler has been detained by Internal Affairs. The commission just called. They've officially backed down and recognized my absolute authority over the city. You didn't just save my empire, Clara. You conquered it. Clara smiled, wrapping her arms around his neck, looking into the eyes of the ruthless Mafia boss who had burned down his own darkness just to keep her safe. We conquered it, she corrected softly. Dominic leaned down, kissing her with a fierce, eternal devotion. He had spent his life surrounded by death and betrayal, a ghost haunting his own life. But as he held Clara, feeling the steady, vibrant beating of her heart against his, Dominic Russo knew he was finally truly alive. He would rule the underworld with an iron fist, but his soul belonged entirely to the woman who had healed his broken heart, and God help anyone who ever tried to take her away. What an explosive finale. Clara didn't just survive the dangerous world of the Mafia. She completely outsmarted her enemies and became the true queen of the Russo syndicate, standing side by side with Dominic. If you loved this intense journey of loyalty, betrayal, and a love powerful enough to conquer a city, please hit that like button, share this video with your friends who can't resist a thrilling Mafia romance, and make sure to subscribe to our channel for more incredible, heart-pounding stories. Drop a comment below. What was your favorite twist, and what kind of story do you want us to tell next? See you in the next video.